What if I told you Britain filled its empire's pockets with Chinese silver it never paid for? Officials in London bragged about winning trade, while Qing governors begged the throne to stop the bleeding as silver drained from the treasury faster than taxes could replace it in the 1830s. So how did this silent theft bankroll an empire? Let's break open the truth behind China's stolen silver. The silver drain, China's treasure, Britain's gain. Britain enters the late 1700s, hungry for tea, silk, and porcelain, the treasures of the Qing Empire. In drawing rooms from Edinburgh to London, nothing beats the status of a blue and white plate from Qing or a fresh pot of Chinese tea. But every cargo ship that returns from Canton leaves behind something precious: silver, mountains of it. By the 18th century, China became the global sink for silver. The Qing dynasty's rules are strict: pay in silver, accept little in return. British manufacturers try to sell wool, clocks, and gadgets. Chinese traders wave them off. The imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. Records show that between the 16th and 18th centuries, up to 40% of the world's new silver went to China. In just a few decades, British reserves shrink even as China's treasury grows larger. The East India Company feels the pinch in India. Each ton of tea means more bullion out, less to fund colonial ambitions. British officials complain in memos and letters home. Silver is the sinews of war and empire, one merchant writes, but the outflow only intensifies. So a plan forms. If the Qing want silver, Britain needs something they crave. But China won't budge on trade. That leaves one answer: change what China wants. Opium enters the scene. Here's the first real twist. What began as tea for silver soon becomes opium for silver. Instead of draining, British coffers start to refill, at a cost that nobody in a London tea shop wants to discuss. This is the moment where trade turned into exploitation. What follows isn't just about commerce, but about addiction, forced deals, and wars over silver. And the biggest question next: how did Britain turn a deficit into a surplus with a single crop? From tea to opium, Britain's silver escape route. In the early 1800s, every British ship loaded with Chinese tea and porcelain came home richer in goods, but emptier in silver. The numbers are jaw-dropping. One merchant complains that Britain pays China millions of silver dollars each year, just to keep up with tea-drinking demand. Parliament hears the warnings, but there's no quick fix. China still refuses almost everything Britain tries to sell. The East India Company grows desperate. In 1839, British officials faced the hard truth: their silver vaults were vanishing fast. The question: how to stop this bleeding? Their answer grows in India's fields: opium. It starts slow. In 1729, China reported about 200 chests of opium arriving yearly. By 1820, the number rocketed to around 10,000 chests. Just 2 decades later, by 1838, British India was now flooding China with opium on an industrial scale. Here's where the story bites. British traders push opium across the border, then collect Chinese silver in return. That same silver, pried from the hands of addicted buyers, goes right back to buy tea and porcelain. For the first time, silver flows back toward British hands. British merchants watch profits rise while addiction in China spreads fast. One British customs officer wrote home, "We see Chinese lining up, silver coins in hand, desperate for another dose. But with every gain, the moral cost grows. Opium carves holes in Chinese society. Labor is lost, families are broken, and entire villages are left reeling." British records barely mention this suffering. They count coins instead. The balance finally tilts in Britain's direction. The empire turns a trade loss into a profit machine. But as the cash piles up, the tension grows. Chinese officials watch their reserves vanish and their people suffer. How long before someone fights back? The next chapter sees silver become a weapon, not just a coin. The gunboats, unequal treaties, and silver reparations. The crackdown began in 1839 when Commissioner Lin Zexu seized and destroyed more than 20,000 chests of British opium in Canton. That single act wipes out a year of profit for the East India Company. British traders send furious letters home, warning the government that the China trade faces collapse. London reacts fast. They frame the crackdown as an attack on free commerce, and the Admiralty moves ships toward Chinese waters. The First Opium War erupts. British steam gunboats enter the Pearl River Delta with engines China never faced before. Qing troops fight with courage, but outdated cannons and slow junks stand little chance. By late 1841, British ships sailed up the Yangtze River, taking city after city. One officer writes in his diary that each victory pushes China closer to the table where silver speaks louder than honor. China sees its limits with no options left. The emperor orders talks. On August 29, 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed aboard the HMS Cornwallis. It changes everything. China must pay Britain 21 million silver dollars in reparations. Hong Kong is transferred to British control. 5 major ports open to British merchants. The silver that once built China's economy now funds British military costs. This treaty becomes a blueprint. Western powers soon copy the model, threaten, demand ports, take silver. Chinese officials call these agreements unequal treaties, but Britain calls them commercial progress. British newspapers celebrate the victory. Chinese families feel new taxes as the government scrambles to cover reparations. Then another shift begins. Now that gunboat diplomacy works, Britain treats silver as both currency and leverage. London banks grow stronger. China's treasury grows weaker, and the imbalance tightens every year. When the war ended, British ships sailed home loaded with Chinese silver. But as the empire gains new privileges, another question rises from China's side of the ledger. How far will Britain push extraction before something inside China breaks? Banking the silver, Britain's imperial fortune consolidates. By the mid-1800s, London's bankers track every ounce of silver coming from the east. The Opium Wars and treaties have flipped the balance. Now silver that once left England's vaults for tea and silk returns through forced trade. British shipping firms, banks, and the government work together, treating Chinese silver as a pillar of the empire. This is a real story of financial engineering on a global scale. Historians find that from 1500 to 1800, about 85% of the world's silver came out of mines in Spanish America. Much of that silver ends up in China. But after 1842, the direction changed. British mints in India churn out trade dollars, special silver coins designed for Chinese markets. The Indian opium fields, tightly managed by the East India Company, provide the drug Britain sells to buy back silver. British warehouses in Hong Kong and Shanghai are stuffed with bullion. It's a closed loop. Opium for silver, silver for tea, tea for Europe. The silver ends up in London, shoring up the pound, funding industry and armies. Financial houses like Barings and Rothschilds handle enormous flows of bullion, all tracked and accounted for. These are the years when the City of London becomes the world's money capital. The Bank of England's gold and silver vaults give it credibility in an age when paper money means little without metal backing. But China pays the price. China's silver reserves collapse faster than the state can respond. Chinese merchants and officials write letters to Beijing, warning that the monetary system is under threat. Local lenders buckle under the pressure. Qing officials pass emergency laws, but with every treaty, the outflow grows. The British Empire grows richer, more stable, more powerful with each chest of silver. For China, the loss isn't just numbers. It's years of lost investment, broken banks, and a system that can't keep up with new threats. While London's bankers celebrated their rising wealth, another question brews beneath the surface. What happens when a civilization loses both its wealth and its will to fight? The next entry will show how silver and opium together break China's backbone. The costs to China: decline, addiction, and economic weakness. By the 1850s, China faced a silver crisis that shook its foundations. Revenue falls short, armies go unpaid, and local banks can't honor their notes. Qing officials watch helplessly as silver chests leave Chinese shores, fueling Britain's rise and leaving holes in their own treasury. This isn't just about economics. It was a country losing its grip on its own future. The Opium Britain ships in for silver brings disaster. Official records show opium addiction skyrockets across provinces. By 1838, China's opium imports reached catastrophic levels. Families break apart. Entire communities lose workers overnight. Some historians link the Opium Plague directly to the weakening of China's social order, and it's hard to argue with the numbers. Economic collapse soon bleeds into violence. The Taiping Rebellion erupts in 1850, lasting until 1864. It's one of the bloodiest civil wars in history, with death estimates up to 20 million. The Qing government's fiscal weakness, tied to its drained silver and shattered confidence. On the ground, merchants struggle with silver shortages. They start accepting copper, paper, anything just to keep trade alive. Prices spiral, and savings evaporate almost overnight. Meanwhile, British banks, factories, and shipping lines were booming. Victorian Britain explodes with new technology and global trade, much of it financed by silver that once belonged to China. Steam engines roar in London while Chinese peasants dig for coins. The silver drain was a direct line from Chinese misery to British power. As the decades roll on, every reform attempt in China faces the same problem. No silver, no capital, no leverage. So while Britain secures its industrial might, China struggles in the dark shadow of silver lost. Here's what happens when this theft is re-examined in the age of independence and economic rebirth. The last twist comes when history starts adding up the final silver totals, numbers that still spark fierce arguments even today. Legacy of stolen silver. By the early 1900s, Britain stood at the center of world finance, its banks and currency recognized on every continent. London's skyline grows taller, trade routes circle the globe, and British pounds move more markets than any rival. But beneath the marble of that empire, you find a river of silver. Much of it was once owned by China. Post-colonial historians have started to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of Britain's rise was actually funded by silver that left China through forced treaties, lopsided trade, and opium addiction? Economic records suggest the shift was huge. By the 1840s, and especially the 1850s, Britain finally reversed its long-standing trade deficit with China. For the first time in generations, silver begins moving westward, filling the vaults of London banks and supporting British credit from India to Canada. The numbers keep growing. Between the late 1700s and mid-1800s, tens of thousands of tons of silver bullion moved through the Britain-India-China trade triangle. One academic study tracks silver prices month by month from London to Canton. These aren't just coins. They're years of Chinese savings, dowries, tax revenues, all swept overseas. Modern China has rebounded. Its economy surges, its voice grows louder in global politics, and its cities rise at a speed nobody predicted. However, the memory of lost silver and foreign imposition still lingers in textbooks, speeches, and national identity. Hong Kong, a relic of Britain's Opium Wars, returned to China in 1997, an event loaded with symbolism about lost wealth and returned sovereignty. Britain's legacy looks mixed. Victorian factories, railways, and steamships made history. But much of that workshop of the world rested on precious metal drawn from a wounded rival. Today, British banks and trading houses carry this legacy in subtle ways, sometimes quietly acknowledged, sometimes quietly ignored. So as historians start adding up those lost tons of silver, the real debate begins. How do you measure the value of what was taken and what was lost forever in the shadow of the empire? This story leaves a mark because every coin, every shipment, and every broken treaty still echoes through modern politics and identity. Click the next video before it fades. Another untold chapter waits for you.